Right, we got everything good. So we are coming in for this week's video, which is the second video for the month of November, and we're going to go right along here with the World War I topics. So last video that we did, we had covered a topic that I think gets sort of overlooked in terms of the aftermath of World War I, and that was, of course, the Soviet-Polish War, of which Poland is trying to assert its independence, while at the same time Bolshevik Soviet Russia is really emerging and trying to form its own boundaries and trying to keep the former Russian Empire together, and it doesn't want to give up that territory. That was last topic's video. So for this week's video, I debated a little bit over what route we would take, and I wanted to hit a topic that this is another one that I wouldn't say is really unknown, but it is overlooked. And it does happen right during the middle of World War I. It happens during the war, and it's very critical to a certain theater of the war. And that, of course, would have been the Arab Revolt. And what the Arab Revolt does, and why it's important even now, is it really sets up a lot of the conflict that is, to this day, raging in the Middle East. I mean, most notably right now, you could probably cite the ongoing Israeli-Gaza war, and that has a whole host of different opinions, and I understand people have different waypoints on that. But to really understand where that conflict even starts, where that even comes from, you do go back to World War I. World War I is the modern progenitor of almost every single conflict that has occurred within the past 100 years within the Middle East. It's not the cause of every one of them, but a good majority of them can trace their roots in some way or form back to World War I. And the Arab Revolt would really be instrumental in reshaping the Middle East after the war and even during it. So that is what we're going to take a look at today. And what the Arab Revolt was kind of what it sounds like. It was a revolt by the native Arab peoples within the Arabian Peninsula against Ottoman rule. Of course, at the time of World War I, a lot of the Arabian Peninsula, specifically around the Red Sea area, is controlled by the ailing Ottoman Empire that has been around at that point for well over 500 years or more. But the Ottoman Empire it's dying. It's on its way out. It does end up on the losing side of the war, and by 1922, the Ottoman Caliphate is utterly abolished, and the Republic of Turkey ends up coming out of that. But that's a whole nother topic, and one day we probably will go over how Turkey actually is lucky in terms of the Central Powers, because it was the only one to actually get a better peace deal, mostly because of events that happened internally. So we're going to look at the Arab Revolt and see why was this event so critical to the Middle East and shaping the Arabian Peninsula at that time, and how does it end up kind of causing a massive problem after the war is done. I'll give you a hint. It's not so much the Arabs that had caused the problem here, it's more their benefactor, the British government, that kind of had a problem. It wouldn't be the first time the British have started something either, as I think we all know. So to begin, we'll just go a little bit back of the Ottoman Empire here. So the Ottoman Empire, as we mentioned, it's been around for centuries at this point. By the time of World War I beginning about 1914 is when it starts. The Ottoman Empire had been around for centuries, but by the late 19th century, the empire is basically restricted. It's no longer on the scale that it once was. It has lost vast amounts of territory, and it is pretty much restricted to the areas of North Africa, Arabia, Asia Minor, where Turkey is, and Southeast Europe, where it has been for over the past 400 years, but slowly losing ground. It is rapidly declined. It is not kept up with modernization. It's not kept up with the same methods of industrialization, and many of the major European powers would call Ottoman Turkey as the sick man of Europe, was the common nickname given to the Turks. Now, there were many minorities within the Ottoman Empire. Of course, the Ottomans were the ethnic ruling majority, I would say, would be the Turks, the Turkish people. And they, of course, were the main ethnic majority that ruled the empire. But you have many other minorities that have been conquered over the centuries. Most notably in Europe, you had the Greeks, you had Serbians, you had Romanians, Bulgarians, all kinds of other South Slavic peoples. At one time, even some Hungarians within the empire. And then if you go down to the Middle East, you got a whole mix of people. You got Arabs, you got what I'm trying to think of the name of the one people. Arabs, Egyptians. Oh, there's the one, I can't think of their name either. Starts with a K, but I can't think of it. But they're right around that area of where the Turkish border is today, and the Kurdish people were there. We also had, of course, other peoples in North Africa, but those are some of the other examples that we can give. Persians probably would not have been a far off thing. Iraqis, Armenians, of course, and there was different minorities within the empire, and this ends up in a similar way to how Austria-Hungary ends up disintegrating because of the factor that Austria-Hungary's ethnic minorities all kind of want equal part or equal representation within the empire's ruling body. The same thing kind of happens in the Ottoman Empire, where these minorities are feeling that they're not getting included in the ruling elite, and they're kind of being sidelined, and nationalistic tensions are starting to flare. Now, during the 19th century, this was not a good century for the Ottoman Empire because they lost a lot of their land that they had left in Southeast Europe. In particular, the Greeks, Serbians, and Bulgarians, all at some point during the 19th century, those three different ethnic groups managed to stage successful revolts that ended up creating their own independent states. Now, with Bulgaria's case, they ended up kind of getting some help from the Russians, which, of course, were the eternal enemy of the Ottoman Turks. The Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire were longtime enemies. So that was not really a surprise that Russia would kind of help Bulgaria gain independence there. But much earlier on, you had the Greeks and the Serbians. They break away, they secure their independence. So the Ottoman Empire is left with very little land left in Southeast Europe after about 1876. Now, in an attempt to quell revolts during the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire did undergo a series of reforms. They would aim to both modernize the empire, industrialize it, and regain control over its subjects. And during around the same time, not exactly at the same time, but about 20 years down the road, I believe, Germany, which is newly arrived on the European stage, kind of sees the Ottoman Empire as an opportunity to kind of see a friend, where most of Europe is against it, but they see a friend in Ottoman Turkey as it's a declining empire. It is an empire that's kind of been, discarded by the other major European powers in a way similar that they're acting in hostility toward Germany, and Germany actually plays a big role in helping the Ottoman government try to industrialize and modernize their country with a large degree. It's no mistake that a lot of the weapons and tools that the Ottomans would use during the First World War were usually German imported. They used the German Gewehr 98 rifle, they used German artillery, German planes. Germany lent them battleships and battle cruisers when they could, and this was not something that was any part of coincidental. Germany had a major role to play in trying to help Turkey modernize a little bit. Unfortunately, it was a tad bit too late, but you can kind of see where, they're both getting ostracated by the other European powers. That might kind of facilitate somewhat of an alliance there. But around the time of the mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire undergoes a series of reforms to try to modernize, and as part of them, they do establish a new constitution and parliament in the 1870s. Unfortunately, the Sultan very quickly goes back on his word on this, and in 1879, the constitution ended up getting suspended, and it was not restored entirely until 1908, when the Young Turk Revolution breaks out in the Ottoman Empire that deposes the old Sultan, puts a new one in place, and the Young Turkish movement now has a large majority of political power within the empire to make the much needed calls for reform that they want. Unfortunately, they're also very nationalistic in terms of favoring the Turkish people in particular. They don't really care about the empire's other minorities. And as part of that, the Ottoman government would adopt a firm plan for centralization, basically trying to enforce Turkish principles, Turkish language, Turkish law over the majority of the empire. And as part of that, they would enforce the use of Ottoman Turkish language throughout the empire's schools and institutions as the official language of education and the government, which kind of marginalized minorities like the Arab people in Arabia who felt that they were being excluded. Now, as discord would grow amongst the Arabs over Ottoman rule, they did begin to express their own nationalistic views, not too far unsimilar to what other minorities had already broken free of the empire's grip had already done. They wanted either self-rule within the empire, or they wanted more ability to govern themselves but remain part of the Ottoman Empire, or they wanted independence, where they could fully be on their own and by themselves. In 1913, the first Arab Congress would meet in Paris, France, to discuss Arab rights. There were 25 delegates who would attend that conference, and it called for the Ottomans to do about three things. One was to give greater local authority over Arab regions within the empire. Two, they wanted Arabic to become the official language of the Arab regions, that they didn't want to have to be speaking Turkish because that was not their native language. They wanted to be able to speak Arabic, which was their language, and they're saying, you don't have to make Arabic the language of the court, in Constantinople. We understand that, but in our local governmental regions, can we at least speak our own language instead of having to use Turkish? And three, they wanted the Ottoman army to allow any Arab soldiers that were within it, of which there were many, to perform military service locally. That way they're not sent abroad and we're not taken from home, we're not getting away from their culture and their heritage. These soldiers could serve out their term in the Ottoman military right there in those provinces or regions of which there was an Arab majority in which they had come from. Of course, Ottoman Turkey is not really obliging to go ahead and enforce these reforms. Now, despite the growing Arab nationalism sense that is growing at the time, many did not think of themselves as Arab. They identified more with their family, with their tribe, which many Arab tribes existed at this time. There's no unified country on the Arabian Peninsula. The Ottoman Empire controls a bit of it, but not all of it, and it's made up mostly of many different Arab tribes, or by their religion. Many did not yet question Ottoman rule, although they did admit that they had some problems with it. That, yes, we have some disagreements, yes, we have some problems with Ottoman rule, but we're not to the point that we want to just, get rid of it yet. At least many of them weren't. So Arab nationalism it's growing, but it's not at the point that it instigates rebellion. That is going to change when World War I breaks out, because we have a very important figure here who is absolutely crucial to the outbreak of the Arab Revolt, and that was Sharif Hussein bin Ali, or as we'll call him, Sharif Hussein. We'll skip the last part there. But Sharif Hussein would be a major player in the play for Arab nationalism when that comes about during World War I. He was the Ottoman appointed Emir of the holy city of Mecca, which, of course, if anyone has any inclination of some of Islam's most important holy sites, Mecca is the holiest city in Islam. It is the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad. It is literally probably, there's no, as what Jerusalem is to the Jews is what Mecca is to the Islamic people. It is the go-to holy site. It's actually, I believe, one of the tenets of Islam that, if possible, a Muslim should try to make a pilgrimage at least one time during their life to see the holy city of Mecca. I do believe that is one of the tenets of Islam. I believe there are 7 of them, if I'm not wrong. But that is one of the tenets, that if possible, because I understand not everyone has the means to internationally travel, but if possible, sometime within their life, they should go to visit the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia now. But Sharif Hussein was the Ottoman appointed Emir of Mecca, and he was also king of the Hejaz region of Arabia. And he envisioned an Arab kingdom independent of Ottoman rule that he would rule personally. So some historians have argued whether or not the Arab Revolt was the result generally of Arab nationalistic tendencies to overthrow Ottoman rule, like many British historians and many of the Arab historians would like to point out to, or if it tended to be more of starting out because Sharif Hussein and his clan of the Hashemites more had this kind of plan to just kind of start a dynastic kingdom rulership that they would oversee the ruler of. Whether or not any of that is true, I think there could be a little bit of truth to it, but I think it's more of a mixture of both, and Sharif Hussein kind of just played his cards right at the right moment and was able to tap into that frustration in order to achieve maybe something that was his own personal goal. Now, Sharif Hussein would become estranged with the new Ottoman government, because we got to remember, he was Ottoman appointed Emir of Mecca. He was already king of the Hejaz, but he was Ottoman appointed Emir of Mecca by the Sultan himself, and he had good relations with the previous Sultan that had been overthrown in 1908. When the Young Turk government takes power in 1909 after the Young Turk Revolution, Hussein's relationship with the Ottoman government rapidly turns sour because he is not willing to go along with a lot of what they want to do. For example, the Young Turks set up the Committee of Union and Progress, or the CUP is what they had set up, which passed centralization initiatives undermining Arab autonomy. Basically, more centralization things to make the empire more Turkish in nature than it was any other minority. There were also plots by the Young Turks when Hussein voiced his opposition. There were plots that were hatched, but they were never carried out to try to assassinate him. But none of these were ever carried out, as we mentioned, but Hussein did learn of them. Hussein secretly would instruct his son, becoming quite disillusioned with Ottoman rule, he would instruct his son Abdullah to hold talks with Great Britain over the possibility of backing an Arab revolt in the Hejaz region against the Ottoman Empire. Of course, this was done in 1913. This was done before the outbreak of World War I. So at the time, Britain's not really looking for a conflict. Britain's not really wanting to back this up, and they don't back it up because they are not interested in the potential creation of an Arab state at the time, as it runs quite contrary to their own colonial desires and interests within the Middle East region. Mind you, Britain, just like any of the other great European powers like Russia and France, are really looking forward to the eventual collapse of the Ottoman Empire not because they want to ensure that these little nation states pop up like Sharif Hussein has for an Arab nation state, but for them to be able to claim these lands for themselves and incorporate them into their own colonial empire. So Britain's not all that much interested in stoking an Arab revolt to create an Arab nation when they kind of covered the same territory. In October of 1914, the game changer would come because World War I broke out in July of 1914, at the very end of July, technically at the beginning of August as well. And by October, the Ottoman Empire officially joins World War I on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary on the side of the Central Powers. And the Ottoman government would declare a jihad, or holy war, against the Allied powers. Now, Hussein was very aggrieved by the Ottoman declaration of jihad. He did not believe that the Allies had done anything to really warrant a jihad. He thought this was the Ottoman government just trying to be greedy and trying to get involved in a war for itself that it had no need to get involved in. And he very much did not agree with the Ottoman government's declaration of jihad and refused to even endorse the idea that there was a jihad going around, which also put it further at length with the ongoing Ottoman government. Now, he would instead send his son Faisal to negotiate with leaders of Arab nationalist societies in the city of Damascus, and now not modern-day Syria. Faisal would secure support from these Arab nationalist organizations for an Arab revolt led by Hussein in order to achieve an Arab state within the realm of the Kingdom of Hejaz. And this is where Britain starts to actually get involved, because now Britain's at war with the Ottoman Empire. They're looking for any way they can to weaken it, and the idea of an Arab revolt is starting to sound pretty good now. Now, while they were initially reluctant to support the Arab revolt, Britain is now going to be more willing to do it, partly because of two reasons. One, it could counter the Ottoman claims of a jihad with Britain's Muslim troops in India. Britain has Muslim troops within its empire, and the Ottoman Empire claimed to be the leader of the authority amongst the majority of the Muslim people of the Islamic religion because they were the largest Islamic power at the time. So if the Ottoman Empire is declaring a jihad, they're trying to inspire all Muslims to rise up against the Allies. Britain fears that this could cause their own Muslim troops to turn against them. So if they can get another group of Islamic peoples to turn against the Ottoman Empire, it would kind of lead credence that you don't have to follow the jihad orders of the Ottoman Empire, that there are other people who see this as wrong and aren't obeying it that are of the same religion. And at the same time, it would also help to weaken the Ottoman power in the Middle East, which is, of course, the big boon that Britain wanted. Now, between July 1915 and January of 1916, Sharif Hussein would correspond in a series of over 10 letters with the British High Commissioner of Egypt, Sir Arthur Henry McMahon. And in this series of 10 letters, McMahon would vaguely promise Hussein that British financial and military support of a revolt for the independence of an Arab state after the war, plus recognition by Britain for such a state. Hussein could be the figurehead leader, being could be a good figurehead leader that could be the head of, since he was the head of the Hashemite clan, which were direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. And thus, Britain kind of backed up Hussein's calls for a revolt and says, oh, we're willing to financially support you. We're willing to send you military equipment, military advisors, weapons, whatever you need. And we will help you get an Arab state after the war. And this correspondence is what we know today as the Hussein, is what we know as the McMahon-Hussein correspondence. And we do actually have a copy of two of these letters here that I have on me. This is one is from Sharif Hussein to McMahon, and the other one is the other way around, with McMahon replying to Hussein. So this is one from Sharif Hussein dated July 14th of 1915. And where in it he is basically stating some objectives here. He's stating that England will acknowledge the independent. He's demanding that England to acknowledge the independence of the Arab countries, bounded on the north by Messina and Adana up to the 37th degree of latitude. And it's basically setting the areas of which he wants an Arab state to be founded. Second, the Arab government of the Sharif will acknowledge that England shall have the preference in all economic enterprises in the Arab countries whenever conditions of enterprises are otherwise equal. Third, for the security of this Arab independence and the certainty of such preference of economic enterprises, both high contracting parties will offer mutual assistance to the best ability of their military and naval forces to face any foreign power which may attack either party, peace not to be decided without agreement of both. So what Hussein is kind of laying out here is what his idea is for an independent Arab state, what he would like Britain to recognize. And the critical one here is probably the response from McMahon. McMahon responds in a letter on October 24th of 1915. And among what he states here is he does state that Britain has a couple issues with some of the claims that he's wanting, most notably with the one in Syria. That McMahon states that the two districts of Messina and Alexandretta and portions of Syria lying to the west of the districts of Damascus, Homs, Hama, and Aleppo cannot be said to be purely Arab and should be excluded from the limits demanded. With the above modification, and without prejudice of our existing treaties with Arab chiefs, we accept those limits. So, the only part of the proposed Arab state that mind you, McMahon is speaking on behalf of the royal government. He's even stating that I have therefore lost no time in informing the government of Great Britain of the contents of your letter, and it is with great pleasure that I communicate to you on their behalf the following statement, which I am confident you will receive with satisfaction. And the only part of that he says that Great Britain is not willing to recognize is he doesn't think. He says that the British government will not recognize Arab control over Syria, but any of the other places that you listed in there, like Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, all that, that is more than free to be within your bounds of territory. We're just not really bound to be the Syrian ones because there's not an Arab majority there as part of the population. But as part of the other stipulations that McMahon promises Hussein in his correspondence, he says that Great Britain is prepared to recognize and support the independence of the Arabs in all the regions within the limits demanded by the Sharif of Mecca. 2. That Great Britain will guarantee the holy places against all external aggression and will recognize their inviolability. 3. When the situation admits, Great Britain will give to the Arabs her advice and will assist them to establish what may appear to be the most suitable forms of government in those various territories. With regard to the vilayets of Baghdad and Basra, the Arabs will recognize that the established position and interests of Great Britain necessitate special administrative arrangements in order to secure these territories from foreign aggression, to promote the welfare of the local populations, and to safeguard our mutual economic interests. I am convinced that this declaration will assure you beyond all possible doubt of the sympathy of Great Britain towards the aspirations of her friends the Arabs, and will result in a firm and lasting alliance, the immediate results of which will be the expulsion of the Turks from the Arab countries and the freeing of the Arab peoples from the Turkish yoke, which for so many years has pressed heavily upon them. So again, what MacMahon is promising in this correspondence, he is only confirming that what Hussein is demanding, with the exception of the claim over Syria, Britain is willing to recognize. Britain is willing to support. Britain is willing to give you this. This agreement in this correspondence will later be thrown out the window. Does Hussein know that yet? Nope. And before we go on here, I'm going to show a few things kind of along with it. So here we have a picture. This is Sharif Hussein bin Ali, who is the Emir of Mecca. He is the king of Hejaz. He is the main one that is correspondent with MacMahon. He's the leader of the Arab Revolt. He's the one that's hoping to establish this, ethnic Arab nation state in the Middle East after the Ottoman Empire has been forced out. And then here, this is technically a map of the aftermath when the Ottoman Empire ends up surrendering in October of 1918. But this is where the kingdom of Hejaz is, just to kind of give you a clue, is this brown area right here on the Arabian Peninsula around the Red Sea. This is the Hejaz. The Ottoman Empire at the time had, all this down here was theirs. As we even still see in 1918, they had control of this a little bit yet. Now, as we mentioned, Hussein has no idea that despite the fact that MacMahon has promised, pretty much an agreement to his terms of an alliance in the correspondence with him, he has no idea over Britain's later agreements with France in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where they would divide the Middle East up into spheres of influence upon the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, and Russia, even for a time, was included in that agreement. And he has no idea about the Balfour Declaration of 1917 that would pretty much promise or made to Jewish Zionists who were desiring a home in Palestine, and Britain pretty much endorsed to try to get their support for the war effort, saying that after the war is won, Britain will support the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Both of these agreements already conflicting with the early agreements they made with the Arabs under Hussein, because they're all involving the same bit of land or parts of land that has already been promised in another agreement or two. So the Arab Revolt would start on June 5th, 1916, when Hussein's sons Faisal and Ali would assemble in Medina with 1,500 recruits. They would declare independence in Hussein's name from Turkish rule, then proceeded to attack Ottoman troops in Medina and sabotage railway tracks connecting the city to the north, which hindered Ottoman reinforcements from arriving. The Arab Revolt would officially be announced on June 10th in Mecca, however, by Hussein with a symbolic rifle shot and then attacking Ottoman units and water supply within the city. Britain would dispatch a battery from Egypt to the Hejaz in order to bolster Arab forces and to help capture Mecca. However, the Ottoman commander there was able to hold out until after the war until January of 1919. So right off in the bat, they start this revolt against the Ottomans. They officially declare it. They attack two cities. They attack the city of Medina, and they go into the holy city of Mecca to try to wrest them from Ottoman rule. Medina is successful, Mecca not so much, but it is official start of the revolt against Ottoman rule by the Arab peoples. Now, the port of Jeddah would fall soon after, with Arab rebels being assisted by British Navy cruisers and airplanes. This crucial victory would now open up a direct open access to food and military supplies being delivered from Egypt, which was a British protectorate at the time. So it now opens a direct supply link between the Arab rebels and their British benefactors. Using the Egyptian battery that had been delivered to them, the Arabs under the command of Abdullah, which was one of Hussein's sons, would end up capturing Taif in September of 1916, and several other Red Sea ports would soon fall after, with British naval assistance, securing the Red Sea against the Ottoman threat and helping to further protect the Egypt and the vital Suez Canal from any further Ottoman attacks. Because the year before, the Ottoman Empire had made a mad dash to try to capture the Suez Canal, which could cripple Britain's supply chain and its networking between India and Europe. And doing so, they almost pulled it off until they ended up being forced back. And what Britain was very concerned about at that time was ensuring that the Ottomans could not threaten the Suez Canal again. So taking the control of the Red Sea ports, getting control of the Red Sea is going to be vital towards securing that from being another invasion route for Ottoman forces. Now, Ottoman prisoners would be forced to fight, ironically, as reinforcements for Arab rebels. So when they would capture Ottoman prisoners, the Arab rebels would often force these prisoners, on the occasion that they needed reinforcements, to fight on their behalf. And this was usually one way of which they made up a majority of their fighting force. Britain would also send additional Muslim soldiers of their own from their own empire from North Africa in order to fight with the Arabs, or those from India in order to have people of the same religion fighting with the Arabs that were loyal to the British army and to bolster the Arab forces. They would also send explosives, rifles, machine guns, artillery, armored cars, and even a camel corps. And all these were part of, giving them supplies, being able to make sure that these rebels are well supplied, well stocked, well armed, and they're able to really prove to be a thorn in the Ottoman side. Now, many British and French military officials would work closely with the Arabs on strategy, coordination, and intelligence in this Arab revolt, but perhaps the most famous of those rebels, not rebels, but advisors, was T.E. Lawrence, Thomas Edward Lawrence, also more famously known as Lawrence of Arabia, which I'm sure we've all heard the stories of at one point or another, or at least the name. And he was only in his mid-20s, and he ended up, now mind you, there were many different other Allied advisors. Lawrence was not the only Allied advisor, but he was one that seemed to work more hands-on than some of the other ones did. Like, for example, Lawrence, more often than not, when he would strategy coordinate with the Arabs, he was working directly with Hussein's son Faisal on a lot of these operations and helped Faisal win a lot of the operations that they did. The Hejaz Railway became a frequent target of Arab raids in order to disrupt supply lines and tie up Ottoman forces from being deployed elsewhere, most notably like the Gallipoli Peninsula, where the Allies were still had staged a massive assault on the Gallipoli Peninsula the year before. Britain is still looking possibly at renewing that offensive. Of course, that will never actually happen. So they want to try to keep Ottoman forces away from the capital of Constantinople, away from the battlefields of Europe and Russia, and they're trying to tie them up further south. So attacking the Hejaz Railway will kind of cut Ottoman supply lines and Ottoman reinforcement lines. And to know where the Hejaz Railway was, this is where that railway was. It ran right through the kingdom of Hejaz, goes up from the holy city, goes up from Medina and connects to Damascus. This was the railway that was a main target of the Arab raids during the Arab Revolt in order to disrupt Ottoman supplies and Ottoman movement of troops. By the end of 1916, the Arabs had formed a regular army from its previous tribal guerrilla forces. Because, mind you, before this, they're pretty much fighting on a guerrilla hit and run tactic. They're doing hit and runs on the trains, they're doing hit and runs on major cities, trying to capture one when they can, but they're not a full on army yet. So, as soon as the Ottomans come in with more forces than they can handle, retreat on horseback, get out to the desert, get out of here, run, hit and run. Now, by the end of the 1916, they've gotten so many reinforcements, both from captured Ottoman prisoners and from British reinforcements, that they've pretty much formed a full-scale large army, which is known as the Sharifian army. And this would be a picture of just one of those bands of units early on in the revolt. More of a guerrilla unit holding the flag of the Arab Revolt, which is very similar to the flag of Jordan today and a lot of other flags. I believe the flag of Palestine is also very similar. In 1917, Faisal and Lawrence would help coordinate an attack on the port of Aqaba that was absolutely victorious and a crushing blow to Ottoman goals in the region of the Red Sea. It cut the Ottomans off completely from access on the Red Sea, and it helped finally secure the Suez Canal for Egypt and made the invasion of Palestine possible. Britain had already taken Mesopotamia, now Palestine and Syria are the next goals going inward. They would also end up aiding British General Edmund Allenby and attack the Ottoman defense in Gaza, and which would then lead to the British capture of Jerusalem and Palestine by December of 1917, which was a major victory for the British and a major victory for the Arab forces. The Arab and Allied combined forces were critical as well to the 1918 campaigns in the Middle East. They would push the Ottomans north and out of Syria and Lebanon, and Damascus would end up being the major crown jewel captured on just before the war ended, as it was captured in October of 1918, and by the end of the month, on October 30th, The Armistice of Mudros was signed by the Ottoman Empire, officially ending the war in the Middle East and withdrawing the Ottoman Empire from the conflict. Mind you, World War I would end about 2 weeks after that when Germany surrendered, but this ends the war there. So World War I has been won by 1918. The Ottomans have been pushed out of Syria, they've been pushed out of Arabia, they've been pushed out of Palestine, they've been pushed out of Mesopotamia, which is Iraq. They have the Arab-British alliance has served a good purpose. It's won its goals. Now the peace comes. Will Britain honor its agreements that it's previously promised to? Not a chance. And here, before we go on, this is a picture of the flag bearer of the Arab forces entering Aqaba after they've just captured the city. Aqaba today is in Jordan. It's right on a tip of a harbor in the Red Sea. It's very close to the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. And I believe there's still a major flag. There's still a flagpole on the tip of Aqaba where the Jordanians have actually put the flag of the Arab Revolt in memory of the victorious battle there back in 1917. Now, the success of the war and the Arab Revolt was celebrated by Arab nationalists, as this was a major victory. We've accomplished what we wanted. Britain's going to back us now. We're going to get. We've done it. We've got an Arab state. That is not what's going to end up happening, because although they expect the Allies to recognize the independence and sovereignty of an Arab kingdom, that is not at all what ends up happening. Now, operating under that precognition, Faisal ends up setting up an Arab kingdom in Syria, with the Syrian National Congress actually proclaiming Faisal as king. Now, the Versailles Peace Conference would end up derailing any Arab dreams, as did any future treaties with Ottoman Turkey, as it pretty much left the Arabs out of the entire deal. Among the terms that were decided at the end of the war was that the Ottoman Empire would be partitioned amongst the victors, mostly the British and French, since Russia had withdrawn from the war and descended into Bolshevik revolution. The League of Nations would grant mandates in the Middle East to Britain and France, spheres of influence along the lines of what had been agreed upon in the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement that had been kept hidden from Sharif Hussein and his followers, where Syria and Lebanon would go to France, and Palestine and Mesopotamia, or modern-day Iraq, would go to Great Britain. This, of course, flew in violation of the previous agreement that they had. The Kingdom of Hejaz, the only concession that they really got was that the Kingdom of Hejaz would be officially internationally recognized as the only Arab state. So although they are getting the recognition of the Kingdom of Hejaz, Hussein and his followers are outraged because, Britain agreed to the previous terms that they would get this amount of land for an Arab state, and now they're not getting it. They're being denied this. This was not what Britain had agreed upon. They've gone back on their word. And Hussein is even more upset when he learns that Britain had promised the Zionists a Jewish homeland in Palestine under the Balfour Declaration from 1917, which I actually have that one as well, which is right here, which is very short declaration. November 2nd, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful to you if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours, Arthur James Balfour. So, in the Balfour Declaration, what comes about, Britain is now promising we're going to move Jews to Palestine and help you set up a Jewish homeland there. You already promised that land to Sharif Hussein as part of an Arab kingdom. And you've divided the Middle East, after already having done the same deal with Hussein, into colonial mandates with France. It's a direct violation of what the Arabs thought they were going to get once the war was over. And this is actually a picture of Faisal and Lawrence is in this photograph as well. This is them at the Versailles Peace Conference. They did attend. Faisal was right here in front. This was Hussein's son, who would later become king of Iraq. And then right over here, this one is Lawrence of Arabia, or T.E. Lawrence. This is him. Hussein and his sons would utterly protest the settlement as violating the earlier agreements made in the MacMahon correspondence, but to no avail. The kingdom of Najd, under Hussein's rival Ibn Saud, was also favored by the British. Even though they were a rival kingdom, Britain had also showed them favor during the war by making certain agreements with them, and this also alienated Hussein further from his agreement with the British. In 1920, France would forcibly establish control over Syria and oust Faisal as king. French colonial rule of Syria would last until the 1940s. Britain would then open up Palestine to Jewish settlement, which further enraged the local Arabs, which is where we can start seeing where the seeds of the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict come from. And the local Iraqis would end up revolting shortly afterward, mostly because they didn't like being under the British mandate system. As an attempt to quell local Iraqi discontent, Britain would install Faisal as king of Iraq and Abdullah as Emir, at the time just Emir, but later be king, but Emir of Transjordan, which is modern-day Jordan, and later Abdullah would become king of Jordan, which the Hashemites actually still maintain the throne of Jordan to this day. So the current king of Jordan, I believe, is the great-great-grandson of Abdullah. So it would be the great-great-great-grandson of Hussein. But Faisal is installed as king of Iraq and Abdullah as Emir of Transjordan in order to indirectly control these regions. Britain's idea being if we put a popular Arab leader on the throne, then we can kind of indirectly, and ones that are on good relations with Britain, we can kind of, control them indirectly. And it did work for quite some time. Jordan remained a British protectorate for a long time. Now, if Iraq's case, when it eventually got independence by 1958, mind you, Faisal passed away in 1933, I believe, but by 1958, Iraq descends into revolution and the Hashemite dynasty in Iraq is overthrown, and so is the Iraqi monarchy. And that was in 1921 that would end up happening, where Faisal and Abdullah are installed as king of Iraq and Emir of Transjordan. In 1925, Sharif Hussein, who had he had left the kingdom of Hejaz the year before because since he had refused to sign any agreements with Great Britain, he became increasingly alienated with the British government, and the British government ended up ceasing to back him altogether and were much more inclined to help Ibn Saud, Hussein's rival, because Ibn Saud is willing to sign treaties with Britain. He's willing to work with Britain and, come to these agreements that Britain wants. So they're starting to back Ibn Saud over Hussein, and Hussein ends up abdicating his throne in 1924 in favor of his younger son Ali, and then the year following in 1925, Britain allowed Ibn Saud to conquer the kingdom of Hejaz, ousting the Hashemite rulers with Ali, and later forming Saud would then unite most of the Arabian Peninsula under his rule into the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is around today. Saudi Arabia is still an absolute monarchy. Hussein, who felt utterly betrayed, who now lost his kingdom, his sons are puppet rulers in two countries that he honestly views as British mandates, and they are. He is utterly dejected. He goes into exile on the island of Cyprus and ends up dying there about 1933 as well. And that that is pretty much the end to the Arab Revolt. It's kind of sad because the Arabs, they do fight the Ottoman Empire during World War I. They do have success due to British help, and the terms of which they conducted it were great. But after the war, as can possibly be expected, the Arabs found themselves cheated because Britain, being one of the great colonial powers, was all too hungry for land, and it had nothing that it wanted to do to keep its end of the bargain intact. And it betrayed the Arabs who had fought with them in every sense of the way, and starts imposing a European created style border system, European style regions in the Middle East, which to this day persist and have caused conflict ever since. So, an instance of one minority within World War I actually getting fighting for what they wanted, but then getting backstabbed once the peace had come and not getting at all what they had been promised, which shouldn't all be that surprising. It is Britain, after all, and any of the Allied powers would have done it as well. So that will conclude for today's video. So if anyone has any questions, any comments, any added information you want to add, feel free to put that in the comment section, and I can go through that when I can. As for next week, I think next week we're going to do Woodrow Wilson, just because the week after is Thanksgiving, and I don't know if I'm doing a video that week, because I'm sure that week's going to be busy. So next week we're going to count that. Let's plan on doing the Woodrow Wilson video next week, and then we'll see if we get one in the week of Thanksgiving or not. So that will be next week's video. So hopefully everyone has a good rest of their week, and we'll see you all back here next week for the following video, which will be on Woodrow Wilson.